Hello and welcome to the American Compass podcast. My name is Oren. I am the chief economist at American Compass, and we are wishing you a happy Thanksgiving and bringing you the episode you need as you travel back across the country in your minivan, talking about a family-related issue, in this case, AI, technology, education, kids, and what you should and should not be buying for the holidays this year. My guest it is an exciting American Compass debut for American Compass's own Director of Programs and Education, Brad Littlejohn. Brad is an experienced educator himself. He's an experienced parent himself, and he does a lot of work for us at the intersection of technology and education and family policy. And so he's done a wonderful paper for us recently, Teaching to the Tech, on the issue of AI increasingly being deployed in schools, works a lot on the legislative issues surrounding AI regulation in Congress. And so had a really great conversation both at the conceptual level and the brass tacks level about when is technology good, when is technology bad, and how do you tell the difference. So I think you'll really enjoy that. Meanwhile, at Commonplace this week, we've gone a little bit quiet for Thanksgiving, but have one piece that hopefully you saw, or if not, still take a look at. It was my advice for how to deal with your market fundamentalist uncle at Thanksgiving. Hopefully you already read it because you probably already needed it, but you still got a whole weekend of family engagements. You frankly have a whole month coming up of family engagement. So definitely worth taking a look at that, get all the data, get all of the exciting anecdotes, get all of the debating points that you need to put your family members in their place, because that is what the holidays are about. So check that out at Commonplace and enjoy this conversation with Brad Littlejohn. Brad Littlejohn, welcome to your debut on the American Compass podcast.
Thank you, Oren. Pleasure to be here.
This is the annual Thanksgiving episode where we give people advice as they take long minivan rides with their families. And what better topic for this year than AI, which I guess is all everyone will have just talked about at the Thanksgiving dinner table, will be top of mind. It is top of mind for our legislators, and it is top of mind for you. You've been doing a ton of great work for us on AI in education, regulating AI as it affects kids generally. And particularly had a great paper for us recently called Teaching to the Tech, about how we have sort of, I was going to say slid rather than decided, but that doesn't rhyme as nicely as slide rather than decide. So it has lost its catchiness, but slid rather than decided into widespread adoption of technology tools in classrooms, especially after COVID, potentially even more now as people feel like AI is the thing of the future, without either really any evidence that any of this helps with education in any way, and also without any real consideration about the trade-offs as they pertain to what kids experience and learn as they are growing and forming. So wanted to start there. I guess the slightly broader question is sort of why this topic, what drew you to it, and then what do you focus on in Teaching to the Tech?
Yeah, I mean, what drew me to it is I've got 4 kids. The oldest is 16. We've educated them at home for most of their childhood. So, I feel like I have a little bit of experience as an educator, and it's always been a priority for us to educate them in as low tech a way as possible. And it's been interesting to see that suddenly catching on just the last 24 months, where there's been a huge movement to kind of the phone-free school movement. That Jonathan Haidt's book was a big part of pushing this. A lot of states have enacted these bans on cell phones in schools, which which just sort of feels like completely obvious in retrospect. But who on earth thinks it's conducive to learning or to anything good to have a student whose phone is buzzing in their pocket, at best buzzing in their pocket, or likely, they're watching TikTok videos on their desk when they're supposed to be in class. So we're finally seeing a pushback on that. We're seeing really positive impacts from that. And yet, bizarrely, at the exact same time that the American public has been mobilizing to say maybe we need less tech in the classroom, a lot of people have been kind of maybe rushing to embrace might be too strong, but certainly kind of charging heedlessly into an embrace of AI in the classroom. Um, and I'm talking. It's interesting to I like talking to people who kind of work with parents groups and have worked with parents groups on some of these phones in schools policies. They've been a little baffled to see a lot of parents kind of seeming to have this kind of cognitive distance. And for a lot of them, it's framed in terms of, well, we just really don't want our kids to be left behind,
Hmm.
right? And I think there's this real fear. I mean, I think everything that's going on with AI is just sort of a giant case of societal FOMO, right? You have all these companies rushing to implement it without any real business plan of how it's going to help, but they need to be able to show their investors that they're jumping on the bandwagon. And I think parents have this very legitimate fear that their kids are going to be obsolete in this future AI economy unless they somehow learn AI literacy when they're young. And so saw this in the White House executive order saying we really need to, if we're going to be China, we need to have AI literacy in K through 12 education as early as possible. And the problem with that is, as soon as like you just need to poke it for like, you know, 2 minutes and it kind of dissolves into incoherence because our kids need to be prepared to, in most localities, need to be prepared to know how to drive if they're going to function in an adult workforce. But we don't say, therefore, let's get them started driving, in kindergarten so that they can develop driving literacy. No, we recognize, they're not really ready for it, and there'll be a time when they need to gain it, and we can teach it pretty intensively when they're ready for it. And if, in fact, I would hazard it probably takes a lot more hours of practice to learn to drive effectively than it does to, give good prompts to a chatbot. And yet there's this idea that somehow we need to just be doing it for, 12 grades, even though the technology is changing so fast that, of course, whatever you're introducing them to, when they're 10, is going to have very little to do with the technology that they're actually going to be dealing with as an adult.
Right. I mean, it seems to me that part of what's going on, and there's this strange slippage in sort of what we mean by tech in the classroom. So there's like phones in the classroom, which they're not even provided by the school. They are a distraction that has nothing to do with education. There is, at the other extreme, I would say the actual kind of learning how to use technology. And to your point, we can, discuss when to use what, even when we were growing up, there was a computer lab. You went to the computer lab and learned how to use computers. Like, there's obviously some value to that, and you could map that onto the AI context. And then in between, there's this sort of idea that tech should just be like infused into the learning. And so I'm curious on the AI stuff, how much of it is we want to we want our kids to learn prompt engineering, which strikes me as somewhat futile for a nine. Like, I almost don't worry about it because I don't even know how you do that with a 9-year-old, as contrasted with like, well, we need our 9-year-old to have a Chromebook and to have AI enabled tools and to be sort of marinating in this as a good rather than bad thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. You look at a lot of the rhetoric on this conflates these two very distinct things, right? The goal of AI literacy, teaching kids to learn to use AI, versus teaching kids or using AI to learn, right? Learning to use AI, using AI to learn, different things. They could both be good things. They could, but they're different things, and they shouldn't be conflated. And so you see this idea that, well, if we can use AI throughout teaching all subjects, it's going to somehow improve learning outcomes across the board. And there's a desperation to do that because learning outcomes have been plunging over the last 10, 15 years. We're at the lowest test scores that we've ever seen. And a lot of evidence is that's because of very uncritical use of tech in the classroom. Both, as you say, just kind of like tech that's sort of stowing away in the classroom, phones that don't have no business being there, but also the use of Chromebooks and iPads as educational delivery tools. Now, AI is not all tech is the same. The problems posed by AI are not the same as those other platforms. But in some ways, in some ways they're more concerning off the bat, right? The main thing that most of us would associate when we have AI, school, put those two words together, what's the third word people think of? Cheating, right? The fact that AI tools make it extremely easy to spit out, at least B plus level work, or with great inflation, now, A plus level work, with very little effort. So it tends to actually undercut learning as presently designed. Now, it's not inevitable that it be designed that way, right? You can, essentially right now they're designed to sort of, the tools are primarily designed for adult productivity, right? And then those same tools are being pushed into the classroom, not realizing that those are fundamentally different goals, right? For adult productivity, the idea is, how do I do something as quickly and effortlessly as possible? But when you're assigning a student tasks to learn something, you often intentionally make it like, the math teacher says, no, you can't just get the right answer. You have to show your work. You have to go through all the process, right? I'm making you build the muscles of doing this in an abnormally slow way, right? Now, you could have an AI tool that is designed to do that, that pushes you to be like, okay, you need to do the first step. Okay, good. Now, what's the next step? What's the next step? But you could think of an AI writing tool that's like helping you brainstorm, saying, okay, you need to come up with a good topic sentence. Yeah, it's not a very good topic sentence, etc. The problem is those tools don't just create themselves. They require good incentives. And education as a space is kind of like one big market failure, because who's the customer? If the customer is the child, well, the problem is, the premise of economics is, you have a customer that has rational desires that you are meeting. The whole premise of education is, you've got a kid that doesn't really have rational desires, and you're trying to help them grow into rational desires, right? If the customer is the teacher, well, the problem is most teachers, honestly, are incentivized to adopt AI educational tools that just make their own job easier. They're not Their incentives are not actually aligned for better educational outcomes.
Well, and to your point, if we think of AI as an adult productivity tool, it makes sense, right? Like, you'd be very annoyed if I said to you, like, Brad, please stop using AI in your research because, it's very important that you go through the hard work of spending time in the library. Like, from that perspective, if the AI improves the teacher's productivity, that is in fact how it is being marketed. But to your point, that teaching is about more than efficiency and productivity in a lot of ways.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think in theory, the parents' interests are well aligned, but parents are not generally that involved in educational decision making. And I think, from a conservative standpoint, this AI education issue ought to be a no-brainer, because you've had this big parents' rights movement of conservative parents mobilizing against what they see as, left-wing values being fed into the classroom without any real transparency and accountability. And, most of these AI systems are designed by folks with pretty left-wing values, and there's, plenty of documented AI bias. So the same parents that are concerned about, I don't know if I like what this, Stanford trained teacher is teaching my kid, should be equally concerned about what exactly is this chatbot teaching my kid. So I think there's conservatives need to kind of lean in on the parental involvement side of it. The other side is just a good conservative concern for taxpayer value for money, right? I get, many conservatives, not maybe American Compass conservatives, but many conservatives are just wary about the whole idea of government regulation of the economy. But any conservative should say, if we're going to be throwing billions and billions of dollars into taxpayer-funded contracts with tech companies, then we want to make sure that we're actually buying a useful product that actually improves educational outcomes, that doesn't expose them to pornography at age 10, et cetera. Like, that just should be a baseline, strings attached to federal or state funding, that you meet basic quality standards.
Yeah, the hypothetical of like good AI, right, that helps you learn how to write or something. I guess that still raises an interesting set of questions, right? Like, would that be good? Like, I'm reminded there's some sort of school in Texas that's expanding that sort of proudly claims it doesn't have teachers. It just, like, the AI teaches the kids in just 2 hours a day or whatever. And of course, they don't have teachers, but they have these other adults that they call guides instead, that are in the classroom doing the things a teacher does. Never mind, we don't have to get into that. there are some people who would say, well, this is incredible. If an AI can more efficiently and precisely tailor a lesson to the exact level and in real time assess how the student, like, this is the optimal, highly productive, efficient way to teach a child. Um, to what extent do you buy into, at least in part? Yeah, that's something. I mean, obviously, we have not introduced a lot of technology in a lot of ways to the teaching process in millennia. Like, are there ways that, yeah, that does potentially enhance teaching, or are there ways that it is antithetical to it or self-defeating?
Yeah, I think we could say a couple things here. I think we could say, in terms of the ideal, in terms of best practices for teaching, no, it's hard for me to see that there's a way to sort of improve on teaching best practices by adding AI tutors. I think this is, as you see, this is one area where, like, there are plenty of areas of human endeavor where technology can improve outcomes. But there are some that are like fundamentally human relational tasks in which we haven't meaningfully improved since the time of Plato. And I think education is one of those. I mean, fundamentally, education is supposed to be, it's not supposed to be just primarily about the transfer of information. It's supposed to be about the formation of character. The teacher is above all a guide, a leader, an exemplar, someone that the student wants to be like. The most successful teachers, the way they get their kids to be good at math is by getting their kids to love math. And how do they get the kids to love math? By seeing the teachers. If you have a really infectiously enthusiastic teacher who loves math, the student wants to be that way.
Right. This is a really good point. When people talk about their favorite teacher, the one who was most influential, the one who made a difference in their life, it's not because that teacher most effectively tailored each next step in the assignment to benchmark how well they had performed and provide the next challenge at exactly. Obviously, that it is good when teachers do that. That is part of being a good teacher, but that is not what marks the successful educational experience in most people's lives.
Right. And I think the disturbing thing is, now AI can do that relational bit. You can design a chatbot, and companies that are super friendly and personable, and they know exactly how to emotionally motivate you. But I think for a host of other reasons, the polite thing to be is say be very wary. But I would, we should just say no to the kind of hyper anthropomorphized, emotionally intimate chatbot interface, which is, to my mind, the only way that you actually get something that is kind of equivalent to. Maybe you can get something that's equivalent to a human teacher, but you shouldn't want to, right? Because it's creepy. Now, I do think that you could say, realistically, given where most public education is at, given the class sizes and the general expectations, could you be better off if you said, look, we are actually going to have a couple hours of class time where they're using these carefully designed AI tutoring systems, and that actually means, because they're able to get through material more efficiently because it's tailored, so much class time is wasted trying to teach to 20 different people at once. Maybe you free up time and you actually use a lot of the school day for more collaborative group activities and discussions. And so the net effect is actually less screen time, more human time. I could see that argument. And realistically, I think that's probably the best we can expect. But we're not even going to get that if we don't put some clear incentives and standards in place.
Yeah. So what does that look like? If you were, well, you are in fact designing what these standards could look like, whether from a, regulatory public policy perspective or just from a how parents should think about this. How do you distinguish, oh, that's cool, they're trying this in school, from, whoa, how did that get in there? What do you look for? What's most important?
Yeah, I think one of the key things would be AI tools that are that are designed to foster collaborative learning. So I actually think this is, so if you think about how have screens in schools been a negative impact, a lot of it is the fact that they kind of isolate students from one another. Every student is just doing their own thing on the screen. learning is supposed to be a social and communal exercise. Uh, so, you know, you could have, and you could have students broken up into tables of like five, where there's a kind of AI discussion facilitator. Uh, in fact, one of the things that AI is really good at, right, is if a bunch of people you're talking to a bunch of people and you want to be able to focus on the conversation, and you don't have to focus on taking the best possible notes. AI can take very good notes of what everyone says, and it can kind of can synthesize it. So I think those kinds of tools. So I think saying we want to prioritize collaborative learning. Um, Another would be things that are very domain specific. So I think one of the biggest concerns that we have that I have right now about the way most of these technologies are designed. Your general purpose chatbot, ChatGPT, Gemini, or whatever, is a horrible educational tool. And it's, so I was talking to someone from DeepMind, and about this that Google is like responding to this pledge to America's youth by like giving all high school students like premium Gemini access. And this researcher was like, yeah, this is ridiculous because Gemini is not an educational tool. And one of the reasons is because, as we said, it'll just do the work for you. But the other thing is that their general purpose, that is to say, you can talk to them about absolutely anything. And so we've seen these stories of students that started out talking to Gemini or ChatGPT about schoolwork, and then it's friendly, that's helpful, and pretty soon they start talking about the problems they're having with their classmates or their parents, and pretty soon it becomes this emotionally intimate confidant. And we've had several of these cases with kids then were coached into suicide by the chatbot. So if you're designing an AI educational tool, you want the chemistry tutor, AI tutor, to talk about chemistry, and then that's it. You want the French tutor chatbot to talk about, well, I guess it's a little tricky because it could talk about anything, maybe in French. So put a pin in that one. But you get the point, right? The domain specificity, I think, it would be another critical design feature to insist upon. And I think the way this could work in practice is, you could essentially have a federally sponsored kind of design competition where companies can submit, here's our cool AI ed tool, and then they can win a gold star, or a silver star or whatever award, and then that becomes, because I think you don't want to try to script in advance exactly what this looks like. The American technology industry is fantastic at innovation and problem solving. You want to get them focused on solving the right problems. So incentivize them to design the best possible tools they can, give them recognition, and then tie public funding contracts to saying products that have gotten this gold star are approved for these preferential contracts. Maybe products that have gotten a silver star gets somewhat less preferential treatment, but are still allowed. Products that haven't gotten any certification, if a parent wants to buy them and use them at home, fine, but the public taxpayer's not going to pay for that.
Yeah, interesting. And so, these sorts of standards, domain specificity, collaborative, et cetera, are sort of the rubric by which you'd be assessing their effectiveness.
Yeah, and of course, privacy would be another huge one, right? I think that's a big concern parents have, is that the way most of these things work is all the data is kind of crunched in some big data center, and in theory, we have, federal education, FERPA, Federal Education, what's the R or something, Privacy Act, that says only educators can get access to students' data. So you'd want to insist on a way of like having the data kept locally within, the school network or whatever.
Yeah. So to your point about, of course, parents could buy whatever they want for their kids, it provides a perfect segue to another thing you've written about recently. Tis the season, holiday shopping is underway, and the hot new toy this year is some creepy thing that talks to your kid or reads to your kid so you don't have to. How's that going?
Yeah. So, yeah, this is, I mean, I first was alerted to this a few months ago when OpenAI announced a partnership with Mattel to create, sentient Barbie dolls, right? Uh, and the more, my initial reaction is just like, ooh, gross, creepy. But then, I've learned more about it. And it's like, this is a multi-billion-dollar market. It's rapidly growing. Uh, and there's a whole host of concerns. I mean, you can start with the fact that estimates are that 80% of the global smart toy market is Chinese producers, right? So then you have that data concern, right? That the when that doll is has the doll has a video camera, the doll has a microphone, and the doll is able to see and hear what your child is saying, and then is processing, natural language responses. That's not because it has this just amazing processing power built into the doll's head, right? It's connected to the Wi-Fi network and it's processing all that data remotely. So if we had concerns about putting TikTok on our teenagers' phones because the Chinese Communist Party might have access to that data, we should have all the same concerns about it. What is a Chinese smart doll company exactly doing with their recordings of your child's bedroom, right? In the past, there have been issues of some of these smart dolls. They can actually be hacked by third parties, child predators and such. So that's a set of obvious concerns. But I think the more fundamental one, which gets into the broader work I'm doing, and I touched on earlier, is simply this emotional dependence component, that it is, just say, fundamentally unhealthy to have a human-like emotional relationship with a party that is not, in fact, human. And I think it's a little difficult. So it's sort of one of those things. It's just like you either intuitively get that and are just like, of course, or you're like, well, why? And then it's like,
Well, I hate to break it to you, Brad, but you've come on a podcast, which means you will now be asked why.
I mean, I think what we can start with is saying humans are morally responsible agents. And so I am capable of showing empathy to another person. I'm capable of being very well. Being very persuasive, hopefully, to another person. And the fact that I signal that I care can make me persuasive. The thing is, I'm a morally responsible agent, and so once I've established that empathy and connection, and you are willing to listen to what I have to say, I feel a sense of responsibility, hopefully some responsibility to your well-being, to a sense of objective reality, etc. What we've created are these bots that have that capacity to establish that deep rapport, so that people are depending on them, asking them for all advice on all sorts of issues. One of the things I'll be writing about for Commonplace is spouses that are getting into conflicts with their spouse and going and asking, the chatbot for relationship advice. And that's different than asking your friend for relationship advice, because your friend cares about your well-being and feels a sense of accountability to objective reality. Chatbot doesn't. The chatbot is designed to echo back to you whatever you're feeling, and thus affirm you in whatever emotions you already have, however pathological they are, however disconnected from reality they are, right? And so that's how you get these, suicide coach chatbots. So that's a kind of fundamental design flaw in the architecture of most LLMs right now, right? So model sycophancy is the term that's usually used. And it's yeah, like at least until we can solve that problem, it is just fundamentally unsafe to have your child relating interpersonally with something that has no responsibility to their well-being or to a sense of objective reality.
Yeah. It seems to me, though, that that's the instrumental argument. These things don't actually
Yeah.
work well. And it does leave open the prospect, okay, well, now we've developed one that does work well. Teddy Hugs a Lot AI, you know, does in fact with 100%, over billions of interactions, give good answers. And I sense that that would not satisfy you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would still say the reality is that um, I think the deeper problem there is that it is pulling us away from dependence upon and relationship with other human beings. I mean, there's this interesting argument about social media that I think that the research is kind of a bit inconclusive on this, but some would say it's not actually there's something uniquely pathological about interacting on social media. In fact, relative, if you measure like not interacting with people at all versus interacting with friends on Instagram, the people who interact with friends on Instagram are generally happier than the people who don't interact with people at all. But the problem is that it's a zero sum thing. All the time that they're spending interacting with people digitally is coming at the expense of interacting with people in person. So I think you could make a similar argument here, which is to say, even if you designed a perfectly aligned, responsible form of AI companion, every hour that you're spending talking to that is an hour you're not spending talking to your brother, your sister, your spouse, your parent, etc. And that crucial, and I think a crucial point there is that our dependence upon our relationships to other people are supposed to be characterized by this mutual dependence, right? My parents care for me, and I will care for my parents when they are older. With That's not the case with these technological devices. We become dependent upon them, but they're not like I can't actually, even if I wanted to, which would be unhealthy, I think, but I can't actually care for my AI Barbie doll because I don't have ultimately there's some software wizard that is capable of caring for it, but not me, right? So it puts us in this one-way relationship of becoming dependent upon another being that does not actually call forth the same care on our part, which I think is what we're designed for as human beings.
Yeah, it's kind of the economists would call it a crowd out argument, right? That if we had infinite time to do everything and you wanted to fill some more of your infinite time with this, you'd probably kind of shrug. But in a world of finite time, and frankly, where this could just be easier, like it takes a lot more work to have real relationships. It does call on you to not simply be served, but also to serve. And if you're provided this alternative, there are all sorts of reasons one would certainly, from a short term perspective, jump at it that are not necessarily conducive to longer term well being. It also seems to me there's a unique problem with kids here. Like everything you've just said would apply to sort of the like, Sam Altman thinks it's great if you use ChatGPT as your therapist. And it's like, well, let's start to talk about the reasons that's a probably terrible idea. With kids, it strikes me there's a basic problem, and this goes all the way back to sort of where we started the discussion about technology and education, where we are assuming the facility of adults with technology to just map onto a child in a way that we don't really with anything else. Like to your point about driving, we don't think like, well, I guess the 6-year-old could drive too. Like we understand that 6-year-olds cannot drive. And so it seems to me there's a lot of just sort of both in terms of what they are capable of understanding is and is not happening in the interactions and the extent to which they are still being formed themselves that makes this sort of technologization, if that is a word, of childhood more concerning than it would be for an adult. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think it's no coincidence that most of these products are designed by, you know, childless tech bros that are I mean, it's interesting. They really are not. They're thinking in terms of what are the capabilities that I have as a hyper competent, high agency 30-year-old programmer, and wouldn't this thing be awesome in terms of magnifying those capabilities? And they don't think in terms of how did I develop these capabilities? What was I like when I was 12? What would it be like for my children when they're 12? And, the
Well, we should say, sorry to interrupt, we should say in defense of Silicon Valley, there is that group you described. There is also the technologists who do have families who simply refuse to let their kids use the stuff. So
yes,
let's keep that group in mind too.
indeed. Yeah, and and I think that there's a sense that, we could talk about the cognitive level, going back to where we began, which is to say that you have to build mental muscles just as you have to build physical muscles, and we can think of a lot of these technologies as essentially they're labor-saving device. And we began with the example of the car, right? You and I have talked about Wall-E as an interesting example of the dystopia we're headed to. And of course, in there you have two things, right? They're all on screens the whole time, but they're also in pods that transport them around so that they never actually they don't have to exercise their mental muscles in terms of problem solving, and they don't have to exercise their physical muscles in terms of actually ever getting around. And however bad that is for an adult, you recognize that like if you had a child that were never walked around, right? And so they would never develop, never mind muscles, they would never even develop proper bone structure because that requires a level of physical exercise. So similarly, the development of the right cognitive capacities requires exercise, which requires friction, which requires not having too much mental labor-saving technology.
Yeah.
But the same is true emotionally, right? That we gain emotional intelligence, and this is in some ways like what we're dealing with here is I always like to emphasize the sense in which the technological problems we're dealing with are extensions of already bad ingrained habits, right? We have this culture of kind of coddling helicopter parenting where the parent is like, oh, you're having a conflict with your classmate, let me swoop in and I'm going to message their parent and we're going to, I don't want you to have to deal with this emotionally trying situation. And of course, the kids that grow up in that setting are pathological because they've never learned to deal with conflict. They never learned to be in a relationship with another person that was difficult. The chatbot is the extension of that. It's the easiest relationship that means you never have to develop those emotional muscles of conflict resolution.
Well, that's true. I guess like a very concrete example that comes to mind for me is like you could say like, well, this is amazing. I'll stick with my Teddy Hugs a Lot AI edition. It will read stories to my kid all day. Like I get tired after 2 stories, but this thing never gets tired. And like one reason to think that's bad is like, well, actually, you parents should be spending time with your kid and reading, even if you can only read 2 stories. But it also occurs to me that the kid learning that there is a limit to how many stories will be read to him, and in fact, no, that's it. There is no more story reading happening now, is also an incredibly important experience. And the device that has infinite patience is in fact extraordinarily dangerous. Can sound like an overstatement, but it's probably not. It is probably extraordinarily dangerous to surround a growing, developing human being with things that, like my guess is with these devices, no matter how rude you are to them or how much you yell at them, they probably don't discipline you. And so there are so many things. This is what I always emphasize. I'm rambling now, but this has just made a connection in my head, because this always comes up in the context of like, well, AI will replace human workers. And I always emphasize it's very easy to take like the standard thing you think a worker is doing most of the time and envision the AI doing that. But you are missing the full range of tasks that are actually a part of that job and the edge cases. And it really only takes a very small share of those being ones the AI can't do for giving it to the AI to be a disaster. And you sort of see a similar thing in the relationship context where, like, yes, an AI can, especially when you're talking about kids, it can do so much of the things you think of as the quintessential element of the relationship. But if you actually take the time to step back and think like, no, what is the entire relationship? What are the edge cases that are actually the most important ones in a lot of cases? If the AI is not solving for that, it is in fact dangerous in a way.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I mean, it's like what parent would put a, you know, candy dispenser in their child's bedroom that, like the rat in the experiment, all they have to do is just tap, and out comes another Smartie. Uh, we know if you did that, the kid would just eat Smarties all day long until they became grossly unhealthy, right? But that's essentially what we're doing at the kind of cognitive and emotional level.
Well, it is the time to eat too much food unhealthily, whatever leftovers are in your fridge. So we should send our listeners off to do that now. But Brad Littlejohn, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And we will be back again soon with another episode of the American Compass Podcast.